We begin with the technical note. We are live on Zoom here. We are also streaming on both our Facebook page and on our YouTube channel, Virginia's People's Debate. We have a closed caption option feed at tinyurl/LG captions. If you open that window, a live feed of captions will come through. Please use hashtag Virginia's People Debate on Twitter to live feed and follow along. There's a chat option on both of the streams and here in the Zoom room, which you may use for active comments, ideas, and even criticisms, but keep your chats and post positive or we may have to kick you out of the chat. Please note, all questions have already been decided by our coalition of over 40 groups, so we will not be taking questions from the audience. We also want to begin with a special thanks to Kate Page of the Prince William County Democratic Women's Caucus, Stephen Spitz of Our Revolution Falls Church, and Kristen Hoffman and Hal Ginsberg of Our Revolution Virginia and Our Revolution National. These individuals have done amazing work to make this debate happen. So what are the Virginia People's Debate? Despite Democratic control of the General Assembly and governorship, the promise of a true blue Virginia remains unfulfilled. We have made some progress in the past years, yet not nearly enough. If we want a green energy future, an economy that puts people before profits, a government that looks like our Commonwealth, politics more responsive to citizens than to lobbyists, and structural changes that move us beyond Virginia's racist origins, we still have a lot of work to do. This is why 40 racial justice, economic justice, gender justice, climate and environmental justice, and clean government groups across Virginia have come together to host these debates, to pointedly ask our candidates where they stand on the issues and what they will do to move us beyond the old Virginia way. Our co-sponsors are 350 Alexandria, 350 Fairfax, Activate Virginia, American Promise Virginia, Appalachian Women of Action, Arab American Democratic Caucus, Arlington County NAACP Political Action Committee, Blue Ridge Democrats, Cannabis Equity Coalition of Virginia, Climate Reality Project, the NOVA chapter, the Democratic Youth Coalition, Earthrise, Fairfax County NAACP, Food and Water Watch, Green New Deal Virginia, Indivisible Northern Virginia, Indivisible Virginia, Loud and Progressives, Network Nova, Nova Climate, Now Virginia, Our Revolution National, Our Revolution Alexandria, Our Revolution Arlington, Our Revolution Falls Church, Our Revolution South Central Virginia, People Demanding Action, Prince William County Democratic Women's Caucus, Progressive Democrats of America National, Progressive Democrats of America Virginia, Protect Our Commonwealth, Resolutions Addressing Systemic Racism, Richmond for All, Sunrise Virginia, Sunrise Williamsburg, Together We Will Henrico, Virginia Coalition for Human Rights, Virginia Democracy Forward, Virginia Muslim Political Action Committee, and Virginia Political Cooperative. These groups, which represent tens of thousands of constituents across Virginia, came together over the past months to not only plan this event, but to make sure that the questions asked at this event are the questions that members and constituents care about. Tonight, we focus on the Lieutenant Governor race. The duties of the Lieutenant Governor of Virginia include presiding over the Senate, standing in or succeeding to the governorship if necessary, and they are members in various boards and councils, the range of which includes the Center for Rural Virginia, the Virginia Department of Juvenile Justice, and the Secure and Resilient Commonwealth Panel. With such a broad job description, the Lieutenant Governor can have a huge influence on the pursuit of justice, equality, democracy, and progress in the coming years. We are very pleased that all 8 candidates for Lieutenant Governor are here tonight. Here are the rules for tonight's debate. Opening statements are 90 seconds each. The order will be randomized. Questions follow, organized by topic, with each candidate getting 60 seconds to answer each question. The order of candidates' answer on each question will also be randomized. Candidates will be warned about time and will need to finish up their sentences promptly. If they don't, we will mute. If candidates single out another candidate by name, we will give that candidate 30 seconds for a rebut. There will occasionally be lightning round questions where we ask candidates to give yes or no answers. No questions have been shared with the candidates in advance. After we finish all questions, we will have closing statements of 90 seconds each. The event aims to last no more than 2 hours. Without further delay, let's meet our moderators. Susan Posey is an activist and interpreter from Norfolk, Virginia. She was a national delegate for Bernie Sanders in 2016 and a Bernie victory captain in 2020. She helped organize the Developing Deeper Democracy workshops and co-moderated the D3 VA DNC Candidates Forum. Her most exciting moment in Virginia politics was about a year ago when Susan simultaneously interpreted the Virginia House Subcommittee meeting on the driver's license bill to a room full of Spanish-speaking activists. Rashad Pearson is an activist and financial analyst from Chesapeake, Virginia. He's an active member of the Freemason Central Lodge No. 1, Tidewater Tenants' Rights, which works to combat Virginia's eviction crisis, and Resolutions Addressing Systemic Racism, which works to combat systemic and structural racism in Virginia. Rashad was an elected Bernie Sanders national delegate in 2020. Now, over to Susan to get us started. Thank you.
Good evening. Let's begin with opening statements. 90 seconds each. Delegate Ayala.
Can you hear me?
We can.
Awesome. For those who are not familiar with me, I'm Delegate Hala Ayala. I represent Virginia's 51st District House of Delegates in Prince William County. I'm a lifelong Virginian resident. For a long time, I did not feel like politicians looked like me or had the lived experience like mine. I'm an Afro-Latina Lebanese-Irish woman, which is a lot, but I never thought I'd be here today. My family struggled growing up, and I lost my father to gun violence at an early age. And when I was pregnant with my son working at a gas station, I had no safety net, no health insurance. I was elected in 2017 to the House. I won against a 4-term Republican incumbent and became the first Afro-Latina national security specialist to serve in the Assembly. In the House, I am a team player. I know how to get things done. I am the only candidate in the field to serve in leadership as the Chief Deputy Whip of the House, and I'm proud to be part of the Democratic majority. Our work has transformed this Commonwealth as we've made history. I've worked with both parties to lead the effort to expand Medicaid expansion, raise teacher pay, abolish the death penalty, legalize marijuana, and made Virginia the 38th state to ratify the Equal Rights Amendment. I'm running for Lieutenant Governor because so many Virginians feel excluded from our political process. We've never, in the 401 years of this body, the eldest body in the country, had a woman of color hold statewide office. Virginians need someone who understands them, their experiences, their challenges, and can bring people together. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Ayala. Delegate Guzman.
Thank you. Good evening, Virginia progressives. Thank you for hosting this event tonight so voters can get to know all of the candidates better and understand the differences among us. I am Delegate Elizabeth Guzman, and I proudly represent the 31st District, which includes Prince William, the only majority-minority county, and Fauquier County, which is more red and rural. I was inspired to run for office by Senator Bernie Sanders in 2016, and I was proud to serve as his national delegate in 2020. It was the honor of my life to travel with him across the Commonwealth as his Virginia co-chair. I won my primary in 2017, running on a progressive message, and then flipped my district from red to blue after 26 years. I was elected as the chair of the class of 2017, the most diverse slate of delegates in Virginia's history. I delivered the State of the Union rebuttal to Donald Trump in Spanish. It was a privilege to represent Virginia, the progressive community, and the Latinx community on national stage. I serve as the Vice Chair of Education Committee, and I passed 24 progressive bills in the last 4 years. I've been fighting for marginalized communities since 2006, and I look at every issue through the lens of racial and social justice. Progressive Virginians, it will be my honor to be your voice in Richmond as we recover from this pandemic, and I hope to earn your support tonight.
Thank you, Delegate Guzman. Mr. Perryman.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Sean Perryman. Happy to join you this evening. I am really at home in this crowd because I am a former advocate myself. I saw that Fairfax NAACP is involved in this. I'm the former president of the Fairfax County NAACP. I was its youngest president in its 102-year history, and also grew that organization from 400 members to 1,400 members. And we got out there on the grassroots advocacy. We did changes like making the change to Robert E. Lee High School and renaming it John Lewis High School. We did changes to policing here in the county, in Fairfax County. But what we really did more than anything else was join together to show up that a progressive agenda can win anywhere in Virginia. And when this pandemic hit, we saw the same communities, rural, low income, Black and brown communities left behind. And that's why I chose to run for office. I used to work for Congressman Elijah Cummings on the House Oversight Committee, representing all the Dems there, and also as an attorney before that. I'm going to take those advocacy experiences, take that grassroots experience, and I'm going to represent you in Richmond to show that a progressive agenda can win in every part of the Commonwealth. So I'm looking forward to this evening. Thank you for having me, and I'm looking forward to you learning more. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Perryman. Delegate Rasool.
Thank you, and we appreciate Virginia People's Debate for putting this together. Look, we've all had some vulnerable moments over the past several years, and a big vulnerable moment for me was in December of 2015 when a then candidate for president said that people who worship like me were not welcome in this country. And I felt vulnerable for my wife, my children, and what would our place in society really look like as we move forward. As a child of immigrants growing up in the western part of the state, we would often hear a comment here and there, but this was something uniquely different. So what did I do? I had an idea. I called up local Muslim leaders and said, we're going to put some money together so we can go and help the local Christian homeless shelter. I called up my friend Joy, who runs the shelter, and we came together all at the shelter. Some press came along, and love, not hate, dominated those local headlines. Look, as a member of the Virginia Legislative Black Caucus and a member of the Virginia Legislative Rural Caucus over the past 8 years, what I have found is the power of those coalitions is what matters. And in 2021, Virginia is going to set the tone for the nation, and I hope we can stand together.
Thank you, Delegate Rasool. Delegate Levine.
Thank you for having us here. That was an impressive long group of organizations, grassroots organizations. I myself began politics as a grassroots activist. I've been doing it 25 years, long before I ever entered into the House of Delegates. And I began basically with actions of civil disobedience in the marriage equality movement at a time when no gay couples could get married anywhere in the world. I started a statewide gay rights organization, marriage equality organization, and I'm very proud of our efforts in that. I also, many of you know my work on domestic violence, sexual violence. It came out of a family tragedy, the murder of my sister, but I have worked very hard to make sure that survivors of domestic violence and sexual violence get all the help they need. I worked for Congressman Barney Frank, really a leader in progressive issues, and served him in the United States Congress as his chief counsel. And I'm proud to say that in Virginia, I am, according to the Virginia Progressive Legislative Action Alert Network, I am the second most progressive member of the Virginia House of Delegates after Sia Price. So I'm very proud to have that role. But 90 seconds is not enough time to go through all of the dozens of legislation and issues I've worked on. So I want to tell you what I want to do as your lieutenant governor. Lieutenant governor is currently a part-time job. With our constitutional responsibilities are relatively small. You just heard it. We work 2 months out of the year presiding over the Senate. I want to be a full-time lieutenant governor, travel to every one of Virginia's 133 cities and talk with folks across Virginia, give their voice. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Levine. Mr. Goldman. Mr. Goldman? Okay, I don't hear Mr. Goldman speaking, so I'm going to go ahead and move on to Council Member McClellan.
Hi, good evening. I'm Andrea McClellan, and I'm grateful to be here with you tonight. I'm running for Lieutenant Governor to continue our work to ensure access to opportunity and to break down barriers for all Virginians who struggle to get ahead. I know what that's like. I was raised by a single mom who juggled multiple jobs to make ends meet. I worked my way through college with a combination of Pell Grants and work study programs for 4 years at the University of Virginia. And after graduating and working and running 2 small businesses, I returned back to Hampton Roads, where I saw too many families who were struggling as my mom had, and I decided to get involved. I volunteered for organizations that helped victims of domestic violence and homeless families. And in 2008, I became a precinct captain for the Norfolk City Democratic Committee and became an organizer myself. And then in 2016, I ran against a 16-year incumbent. And despite being told by the good old boys to sit down, wait my turn, I won in 19 of 23 precincts. And I now represent 125,000 Virginians, the largest constituency of any candidate here tonight. In my role in the Norfolk City Council, I have learned to become an effective listener, an advocate, and an ally for my constituents, whom I serve 365 days a year. And I look forward to bringing those skills to work as your next Lieutenant Governor to continue our progress on criminal justice reform, addressing climate change, addressing our digital divide, and stopping the GOP's attacks on our healthcare and reproductive rights. The era of
Time.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Councilmember McClellan. Mr. Goldman.
Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it. I fixed it. Here in Richmond, we have our broadband video problem. So tonight I'm in solidarity with the folks out in Western Virginia. Truth is, I thought about not participating, however. I've never been more embarrassed by my party. I was Henry Howell's campaign manager, godfather of progressive politics in Virginia. The only white person in Virginia willing to be Doug Wilder's campaign manager. They threw a lot of stuff at us. We were adults. We could handle it. But last month, Democrats in the House of Delegates killed a constitutional amendment to take out a racial poison pill in the educational clause of the Virginia Constitution, put in there by the last segregationist governor to deny equal educational opportunity to all children. These kids can't defend themselves. They need us, as I have done, working with Henry and Doug over the years to get a constitutional right of equal educational opportunities. I could only find a GOP senator to sponsor it. We managed to get it through the Senate without a dissent, with only one dissenting vote. The Democrats in the House killed it for bogus reasons. That's unacceptable. Truth is, Virginia has long put new roads and fancy college buildings over modern school facilities for urban and rural youngsters starting in 1986. It has to end.
Thank you, Mr. Goldman. Mr. Warren?
Hello, I'm Xavier Warren, and I want your vote to be Lieutenant Governor because Virginia is in a COVID crisis, a racial crisis, a climate crisis, and an economic crisis that has caused hundreds of small businesses to close, thousands of people to lose their jobs, 1 in 3 people to suffer pay cuts, 1 in 4 people to go hungry, women to drop out of the workforce at an 8-time higher rate, and many people to lose their homes due to eviction. Beyond presiding over the Senate and performing any tie-breaking vote, the Lieutenant Governor serves on business committees to focus on generating economic development, advancing entrepreneurship, and creating jobs. See, I've witnessed firsthand what an economic downturn could do to our communities. I was born and raised in Danville, Pennsylvania County, and when textiles and manufacturing shipped their jobs overseas and tobacco started to decline, thousands of Virginians lost employment. What followed? Education attainment rate dropped. The economic infrastructure imploded, and also majority of people fell below the poverty line. I watched so many people leave due to the lack of financial opportunity. I came from a working class family. My mother was a bioanalyst. My father was a maintenance mechanic. I graduated from my public schools and our historically Black college, Hampton University, and Georgetown with my master's. I achieved my dream of becoming an NFL sports agent and also starting a very successful federal funding agency that helped schools, hospitals, and local government to secure millions of dollars to support people in need. I look forward to sharing how my progressive values could be able to help make Virginia the leader in economic justice, environmental justice, and racial justice. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Warren. Now I'm going to hand it over to Rashad for our first question.
All right, we begin with questions about criminal legal reform. What specific approaches do you favor or disfavor to end mass incarceration and over-policing in Virginia, including but not limited to eliminating mandatory minimum sentences, reducing the overclassification of felonies, banning private for-profit prisons, minimizing imprisonment for minor drug possessions, and or creating and implementing diversion programs? Mr. Perriman, you'll go first. You have 60 seconds. Terrific. So I would say out of all the candidates here, I have the most robust platform as it relates to criminal justice reform, and I've been doing this work for a while. I not only support legalization, expungement, but I've come out recently in an op-ed talking about how we should never take away people's right to vote because they've been in prison. But and on top of that, what we really need to do, besides getting rid of mandatory minimums and those things, is address the school to prison pipeline. We're starting kids out in elementary school, going off to school to prison pipeline. The way we do that, remove SROs from schools. I've advocated for that in Fairfax County. I've stopped them from being entered into the elementary schools, and I have a record of working with people on criminal justice reform. So I not only would do that, but I would also defelonize drugs. We are talking about legalization of marijuana, and too often that conversation revolves around tax revenue. It should revolve around equity and what's right. And a drug problem shouldn't be treated as a criminal problem. It should be treated like a health problem, like so many other countries do. So this is where I would begin. You could go to perrymanforvirginia.com to learn more. Thank you.
Mr. Warren, you're up next.
Thank you. Yes, I support all those issues that you like. Okay, can you hear me now? Great. Thank you. I support all the issues that you brought up. And we need to take it a little bit further. We need to get rid of cash bail. I also believe that once you serve your time, your record should be expunged, and we need to automatically restore former inmates' rights. Once you serve your time, you need to be supported when you get back in society. You know, as a Black man, and as you all know, Black and brown communities have been disproportionately targeted and going to prison. If you go to prisons right now, even though statistics show that Black and white folks have the same amount of crime, our prisons are filled with people of color. So we need to really go and support these people. I've actually worked with the Economic Development Administration at the federal level to bring in over $2.5 million in economic programs and workforce training to be able to help with former inmates. But also, this is a financial issue. We need to be able to help get these people into jobs, train them, build up the skills so they can be able to have the opportunity to fund from themselves and support themselves and their families. Thank you.
Mr. Goldman, you're next. Mr. Goldman.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, I'm having some trouble. I'm not going to repeat. I endorse many of the things they have to say. Let's just talk about a couple of things that happen here in the city of Richmond. The bail issue has always been a problem here, and people go to bail over $100. It's like debtor's prison. I don't know why that continues. It certainly has to stop. In terms of mandatory minimum, it's important to remember that years ago, mandatory minimum was considered a reform. People did not want to give the judges too much power because they had, one person got 5 years, another person got 10 years. I think mandatory minimums can be helpful, but let's also remember the history. Sometimes these reforms don't always work out. We certainly need to stop putting people in jail for all these drug crimes. That's just, I don't know why we can't do that, and hopefully the governor will amend the legislation. That has to be done. We just haven't been able to do much of that basically in the city of Richmond.
Time.
And I'm not sure why.
Delegate Rasul.
Thank you. 8 sessions ago, when I first started in the General Assembly, my first bill was an expungement bill because I saw there was so much work to do. Fortunately, a lot has changed, but there's a lot more work. You know, sadly, several years ago, a young gentleman, Keontae Spencer, his life was taken by local law enforcement. And to this day, we still don't know exactly what happened. There's a lack of transparency and accountability sometimes. And for me, my bill that came forward said we need to be able to see this raw footage. So in addition to many of the other policies that were mentioned earlier around cash bail, we need to look at the transparency issues, think through what qualified immunity should really look like, and end that here in Virginia. And then most importantly, I am hoping that the governor, as he amends the marijuana legalization bill, equitably puts those funds into these Black and brown communities that have unfortunately disproportionately been impacted over many, many years of being over-policed.
Councilmember McClellan.
Structural racism is a persistent and disgusting reality in our Commonwealth, unfortunately. This is something that we're all addressing right now. Locally in Norfolk, I serve as the co-chair of our Mayor's Commission on Social Equity and Economic Opportunity to start to try and address it here in the Hampton Roads area. I am a big proponent of having independent oversight. We are working to stand up our own citizen review panel with subpoena power, as well as I support additional training for public safety to ensure that they understand de-escalation and conflict resolution techniques, and that our public safety reflects the diversity of the communities which they serve. So I support those efforts as well. I'd like to eliminate mandatory minimum sentences, particularly as it relates to drug crimes. I'm very proud of the General Assembly and would like to thank the delegates tonight who are here with us for repealing the death penalty. Great job. And I'm happy with that, but I'm not so happy with the delay in legalizing marijuana, and I hope that the governor will take that into consideration.
Delamit Guzman, you're next.
Thank you. As one of the social workers that served in the Virginia Assembly, that worked early on her career as a CASA cis child advocate, that have seen how while white children are sent home, the brown and Black children are sent to detention centers, I've been passionate about criminal justice reform since I got elected. I champion bills to increase the age of minors trial as adults. I introduced the boldest expungement bill in the 2020 session that was sent into the Crime Commission. I passed legislation to amend the Criminal Justice Services Board to include more communities of color. I introduced legislation to ban private prisons in Virginia. I ran legislation to study the return of conditional parole. To your question, what we need to do, we have made progress, but there's still stuff to do. We have to return of conditional parole. We have to we need a clear pathway for expungement of nonviolent felony and misdemeanor crimes. We need to ban private prisons in Virginia.
Delegate Levine.
So tried to write down everything you asked. Ban private prisons, check. And mandatory minimums, yes. Diversion programs, we actually have a number of very successful ones in Arlington, Alexandria. I would end qualified immunity. I have passed a bill, a really important bill to train teachers on de-escalation that fights the school to prison pipeline, reform cash bail. I've been putting forward expungement bills since my very, very first year, time after time. I'm really glad that we got that done. But we do need to go further. We did do the death penalty, and we got rid of the death penalty, and we have to make marijuana legalization happen sooner. Look, I support no prison sentence for people that are addicted to drugs, period. Because if you're an addict, you need help. You need health care. You don't need to go to prison. And this idea that white people who use opioids don't go to prison, but Black people who use crack do, makes no sense whatsoever. Addicts need our help, not our prisons. And I sit on the courts of justice. I've worked on many of these bills. We've gone a long way. We can go further. Thank you.
Delegate Ayala.
Thank you. Thank you, Rashad, for your question. And I too was trying to write down everything. So check mandatory minimum in qualified immunity, expungement. I was proud to be part of that bill carried by Delegate Herring or Leader Herring in the House of Delegates. Death penalty, we got done. Decrim of marijuana, we're getting done. And also, I would like to see the decriminalization of mental health. But in addition, bail bonds are just another way to criminalize our justice system, which is broken. And trial detainees are more likely to be hurried into decisions to plead guilty and spend less time to plead guilty and lower the charge versus we want them to spend less time behind bars. People of color, as we've heard from each one of the members here, are disproportionately affected by these cash bail bonds, but also with qualified immunity. And I'm trying to get everything in reforms, this reforms to ensure the accountability for those who violate people's constitutional rights and not punishing good officers. But I also want to add Marcus Alert that we passed this session. I am very proud of that. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
It's okay.
All right, thank you, candidates. Now we'll be moving to our lightning round questions. So the question is, do you support full legalization of marijuana use and the expungement of conviction records and restitution for those convicted of marijuana use and or possession after it is legalized for adult use? Yes or no answers only. We'll start with Mr. Warren.
Absolutely.
All right, Delegate Levine.
Yes, I've been a leader on this.
Delegate Rasul.
Yes.
Delegate Ayala.
Yes.
Delegate Guzman.
Yes.
Mr. Goldman.
Yes.
Mr. Perriman.
Yes, yesterday.
And Councilmember McClellan.
Yes.
All right, thank you guys. And we'll be moving to Susan for the next set of questions.
All right, wonderful. Thank you, guys. We move on to issues of economic justice. How will you support and enforce workers' rights? Will you advocate and agree to repeal laws that impede unions' rights to collectively bargain? Mr. Goldman.
Well, that's an old issue for me. I ran Henry Howe's campaign, excuse me, back in the 70s when that wasn't very popular, as you can quite imagine. So we've been for that for 40, 45 years. And Henry was very bold, and I give him a lot of credit. Obviously, he's not here with us. Doug Wilder also fought for these things. But I think both of them, let me get back to it, unless we fix the education system in this country, you're really not going to be able to get the kind of economic equality that you want. Now, we need more training programs, certainly stuff that will educate kids. Everybody should graduate with at least a skill, but we are not even coming close to that. The average school building in this state is obsolete. It can't teach a modern education. So what are we talking about? You want economic rights? You got to give people the skills to get them. And we're not even trying, in my opinion. We're way behind. And I think that is the number one economic issue. And you read the Democratic Party platform and agrees.
Thank you, Mr. Goldman. Mr. Perryman.
So when I look at this issue, what I would say first and foremost, I come from a family that is a union family. I was first in my family to go to college because the unions gave the benefits that allow my parents to make a better life for me. So I understand the importance of this. We absolutely need to repeal right to work. But I think most of the people here on this will agree on this. We need worker protections. This is the reason I'm running for office. I was disgusted to see that we couldn't pass paid sick leave during a pandemic. What I would say separates me from the other candidates is that we have to educate folks and bring them along. We have to have a real advocacy effort around that to get people to understand why unions make your life better. I'm the one who wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post, which probably may be unpopular with some voters, that about repealing right to work, explaining its racist origins, and explaining how this will make us all better off as Virginians. That we absolutely need to support our workers and repeal the laws that stop strong unions and strong collective bargaining.
Thank you, Mr. Perryman. Delegate Ayala.
Thank you. Lot to answer, but I'll try to get it all in. You know, I worked at a gas station making minimum wage with no healthcare provisions or safety net. I know that workers are facing, and that's what I fight for. My son is working on the front lines of this pandemic every day and has been since day one. I am glad that we in the General Assembly with the Democratic majority supported legislation to raise the minimum wage to $15 per hour, put out collective bargaining to public employees and prevailing wage. And during this past session, I put in legislation to provide hazard pay to all frontline employees during this pandemic, to create also a universal paid family medical leave program. And that for the first time is included in the governor's budget in history, just to see the cost that would impact the Commonwealth. And as Lieutenant Governor, I will continue to expand opportunities for project labor agreements and advocate for family sustaining jobs. In this post-COVID economy, Virginians need to advocate for workers' rights. As Lieutenant Governor, I will continue to champion these priorities.
Time.
Thank you, Delegate Ayala. Councilmember McClellan.
The issue of economic justice is something that I understand on a personal level. Having watched my mom, who after my dad left, had never worked outside of the home and didn't know where to go to start, was able to go back to community college and take a couple of classes and earn a living as a technical illustrator. So for me, ensuring that we have opportunities for workforce development and are supporting our community colleges and our trade schools and apprenticeship programs, because I think there are going to be a lot of people as we come out of this COVID economy who are going to need to be retrained and upskilled. We support our unions, absolutely. I support repeal right to work. I think also as we look at protecting workers, making sure that we are paying them a living wage, and I support the Democratic majority and the General Assembly and their passage of that minimum wage increase. So absolutely, economic justice is something that will be key to my role as Lieutenant Governor.
Thank you, Councilmember McClellan. Delegate Guzman.
Thank you. As the chief patron of the collective bargaining bill, I could tell you that I'm ready as a second union member to go to the Senate and be the voice of the working families. We need a collective bargaining bill that is inclusive, that is not gonna leave any worker behind. Right now, localities have the option to opt in or opt out. So we want a comprehensive bill that is not gonna leave any worker behind, including our teachers and our professors in universities. Then we have to go to repealing right to work. As the member of the labor subcommittee, I have the honor to cast my vote in support of that bill. And I'm ready also to go to the Senate to be the voice, to educate the senators on how it's important to repeal the right to work. The repealed right to work, it's providing workers a voice at the table to fight for better equipment, to better their salary, and for training purposes as well. So I'm as a champion, I can do it.
Thank you, Delegate Guzman. Delegate Levine.
So I think collective bargaining is a basic human right. Unions gave us overtime, unions gave us the weekends, and unions have had a really bad rap recently, and they shouldn't. Workers need unions. And I've been there on the front lines, not just at the picket lines. In Alexandria, I helped organize the Dash bus workers. Just this week, I was out there on behalf of the firefighters. And when Amazon came to Arlington, I was the only legislator there in the room saying, I won't support your deal unless you have a project labor agreement. I oppose right to work. I don't like to ever use that language. I talk about I support rights for workers laws because it's a complete misnomer. And frankly, when it comes to schooling, some of the best apprenticeship programs are done by unions. We need to promote and let people know all the good things that unions did. I've done legislation to raise the minimum wage. I did the collective bargaining legislation. I was the first legislator of Virginia to propose paid family medical leave. Economic justice is a basic right. We have half of Americans who can't afford a $400 sudden payment. We have massive economic inequality.
Time.
Legislation too for taxation.
Thank you, Delegate Levine. Delegate Rasool.
Thank you. I absolutely support repealing the right to work. My campaign was the first to unionize. Look, unions brought me into this. The first conversation I had about politics was the president of local CWA 2204. And we both agreed that what is happening economically in this country is unethical, the distance between the have and have-nots, and we have got to stand up and make sure that we are doing more for everyone. And what does that mean? That means actually following through on raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour, because it's only going to 12 right now. That means repealing the right to work, make sure project labor agreements are integrated all throughout some of these government contracts that we have. And like Mr. Goldman, I'm a fan of Henry Howe and keeping them honest. And that is critically important as we move forward. So for me, I think that workers' rights need to be upheld, and no longer should we be last in the nation with regards to how we treat our workers.
Thank you, Delegate Rasool. Mr. Warren.
Yes, I want to say, if you are a union worker, I am your candidate. I'm actually a union member of the NFLPA and have been a proud dues paying member for over a decade now. I've experienced collective bargaining, termination pay, also fought during arbitration, and helped out with injury pay as well. That's why it's, the financial landscape right now for people and families in Virginia is unfair. It's unfair. That's why we need to increase the minimum wage to $15 an hour. We need to be able to out there actively pursuing foreign and domestic companies to build their high wage jobs here in Virginia. And also we need to be able to support small businesses because they account for the majority of the workforce out there. I will protect the unions. I will be there for you. I've done it for the past decade. I am your candidate.
Thank you, Mr. Warren. Next question. According to the Princeton Eviction Lab, Virginia is home to 5 of the top 10 cities with the highest eviction rates in the country. What will you do to help curb this crisis long term? Further, what are your plans for extending or not extending national eviction moratoriums during the pandemic? Delegate Rasool.
Thank you so much. Housing is a basic human right, and what we need to be able to do is to make sure that we strengthen, number one, tenant laws, make sure that we continue with the moratoriums, especially as we're going through this COVID pandemic. It is unacceptable that we have ranked so low in this nation. But what we have done is try to increase funding over the past several years into the Housing Trust Fund. But there's a lot more work that can be done, including thinking through how we approach zoning and upzoning in Virginia, thinking through what we're going to do as far as some of these housing vouchers. We have such a long waiting list here in Virginia of people who are waiting on support from the federal government. The state needs to be able to step up and say, this is a basic human right, and we have to be able to step up and do more. We have people who are just waiting to fall off this fiscal cliff. And for me, I want to make sure that Virginia is there to catch them. We have money in our budget, and we need to put that to work.
Thank you, Delegate Rasool. Councilmember McClellan.
Last week, Norfolk just announced that we received a $560,000 grant to help us with the eviction crisis, where we are actively working with both renters as well as landlords to provide early services to ensure that folks don't get in a position where they're going to face eviction. But I agree with my colleagues and the other candidates here in terms of extending the eviction moratorium. I think we need to be talking about with all the parties involved there. But let's talk also about affordable housing in general. And I think Delegate Rasool started to talk about that. That's something that I'm very concerned about. I served on the Planning Commission before coming on to City Council, and I chair the Hampton Roads Planning District Commission. And I think affordable housing needs to be dealt with on a regional as well as a statewide basis. We need a statewide database of affordable housing where people can search and find opportunities with also information about proximity to schools and healthcare and food. So they're not in a food desert, et cetera. But that needs to be searchable and available for all throughout the Commonwealth. It doesn't currently exist. And that'd be one of the things that I would absolutely like to look forward to as Lieutenant Governor to highlight.
Thank you, Councilmember McClellan. Mr. Warren.
Yes. So listen, the reason why people can't get quality housing, healthcare, insurance, and also quality education is because they do not have the financial means. People are hurting out there. People have lost their jobs, and actually, telling the truth, people have been hurting pre-COVID financially. I am here. I believe in economic empowerment. I believe in having people get jobs with livable wage, to be able to have them to be able to take care of themselves, to be able to bring in the resources and revenues to be able to create generational wealth. I am the only candidate that actually brought in over the last year $18 million to help with folks in need. My focus is economic empowerment, economic development, and build our infrastructure to get people back to work. The best social program is a good job, and that's the reason why I'm your candidate.
Thank you, Mr. Warren. Mr. Goldman.
I don't think the crisis is solvable without a statewide initiative. It's a statewide problem. I know when Mayor Wild was here, I was advising him for a while. Obviously, Richmond has grappled with this issue as much as any of the cities, and we had that crisis, and it's been going on, and we've had a tremendous difficulty, even though we've tried to address it. I see where the state now has $1 billion windfall with more money coming in for COVID. Seems to me if you're going to get a statewide initiative, and again, I'm not saying local cities and regionals aren't important. I agree with that. But you're never going to be able to do this, given the magnitude of it, without a statewide mandate. We have $1 billion windfall, apparently. Now we have a surplus. Now's the time to take some of that money and start directly dealing with this problem. And I think the governor and the legislature ought to put together some folks in a hurry, and we can come up with something that'll start us down the right path. But if you leave it even regionally, I don't think the economics work. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Goldman. Delegate Levine.
In the richest country on earth, no one should be homeless. We have more than enough capability to make sure everyone has housing. But home insecurity, housing insecurity is a function of many things. It is absolutely a function of income inequality. It's also a function of mental health needs. It's a function of racial injustice. It's all these things tie together. So of course we need to extend the say that you can't be evicted during COVID. Imagine during COVID being evicted when you're more likely to get infected. It could very well mean your life. I've worked with Alexandria and Arlington to make sure that even hotels that weren't full were helping people that had been evicted during COVID. We absolutely have funded the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. It needs more funding. I've consistently voted for more funding. Another bill that I put forward was a bill that if you are evicted, you immediately know a legal aid attorney in English, in Spanish, and other language that you speak, so that you know where to go and you can do all your legal rights. Because a lot of tenants have legal rights. You might be constructively evicted.
Time.
The building's bad, and you need to know those rights too. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Levine. Mr. Perryman.
Yes, I think a lot of great ideas have been raised as far as how we can address the housing crisis that existed before COVID. All COVID did was highlight it. We were the top 5 of the eviction cities in the country. Many of those cities and many of the people impacted by eviction were Black people. I don't think this was an accident in the former capital of the Confederacy. It's the way we have our landlord-tenant laws. But we should get to the root causes. We obviously extend the moratorium. But when I have a weekly chat every Wednesday at 7. And when I talk to housing experts, I said, what is the one thing that we could do to deal with this eviction crisis? They said a living wage. If we had a living wage, or if we had a minimum wage that was tied to something like a cost index, then we can give people a way to live in Virginia and live in the Commonwealth with dignity. So this is something that we have to absolutely address the root cause of this issue. And we also have to get into our zoning laws that make it, these not in my backyard laws that make it so hard to have affordable housing.
Thank you, Mr. Perryman. Delegate Ayala.
Thank you. Well, I'll correct some of the record, but the cost of living in the Commonwealth is a challenge for far too many Virginians, and we need to make housing more affordable, of course. Growing up, my family lived paycheck to paycheck and always was one step away from homelessness. During this past session, we did have eviction moratorium carried by Delegate Cole to protect families against the crisis. So I was glad to be a chief patron on that. I also advocated for additional funding for Housing Trust Fund with my fellow Black Caucus members. Because of that, Governor Northam is giving an additional $25 million to the fund on top of the $85 million previously allocated. As unemployed Virginians get back on their feet, the funding will go to support those who are struggling the most. And as Lieutenant Governor, I'll continue to advocate for increasing the mandatory notice for rent increases from 30 to 60 days, fight for an improved increased rent relief, and work with our federal partners to use Medicaid dollars for housing, especially for our senior citizens. But I also want to mention, we raised the minimum wage. This is what a Democratic majority does. This is what I'll carry into the office of the Lieutenant Governor.
Thank you, Delegate Ayala. Delegate Guzman.
Thank you. I would say that I am the candidate here who works with budgets on a daily basis. So what I would do as your Lieutenant Governor is, number 1, to make a priority and take money out of our rainy funds to put it on people's rents, because it is not fair that while we have this money seated on our budget, then it's people who's facing homelessness in the middle of this pandemic. We also have to ensure, we have to take the responsibility as a state, and we have to own that responsibility. We cannot wait for other entities, federal government, or receive more aid. We have the money and we have to help these Virginians. And also we have to ensure that these resources have to be available in different languages. As an immigrant myself, I'll make sure and have already held this administration accountable for not providing these resources to all of the communities who reside in Virginia. So as your Lieutenant Governor, I'll make sure that it'll be an inclusive policy that will be delivered in different languages to all of the residents of Virginia.
Thank you, Delegate Guzman. Now, a few lightning round questions on economic justice. Yes or no answers only, please. Lack of broadband and cell phone coverage impacts healthcare delivery, education, voting, attracting businesses, working from home, and communication. Would you make rural broadband a priority? Councilmember McClellan.
Emphatically, yes.
Mr. Perryman.
Yes.
Delegate Guzman,
Yes.
Mr. Warren,
I've secured funding for broadband. Yes.
Mr. Goldman,
Of course.
Delegate Levine,
Yes.
Delegate Rasul,
Yes.
Delegate Ayala.
So yes.
Thank you. Would you support a standard guaranteed benefits package that includes sick pay, paid holidays, and family leave for all employees of businesses operating in Virginia? Delegate Levine,
Yes.
Delegate Ayala,
Carried one of those legislation, passed, and yes.
Mr. Goldman,
Yes.
Delegate Guzman,
Yes.
Councilmember McClellan,
Yes.
Mr. Warren,
Absolutely.
Delegate Rasul,
Yes.
Mr. Perryman.
Yes.
Would you enforce anti-monopoly and antitrust law related to large healthcare organizations? Mr. Goldman,
I got to say yes or no. I'm a lawyer. I can't say yes to that. That's not a question a lawyer can just answer yes or no. So I'll have to say no.
Delegate Levine,
To the extent I can, yes.
Councilmember McClellan,
Yes.
Mr. Warren,
I will work with our Attorney General. So yes.
Delegate Rasul,
Yes.
Delegate Guzman,
Yes.
Delegate Ayala,
To the extent of my capabilities, yes.
Mr. Perryman.
Yes, when it's appropriate. Yes.
Thank you very much. I'm going to hand it over to Rashad.
All right, so we're moving on to our next segment, and these are questions about criminal or racial justice in Virginia. There are new stats out indicating that life expectancy is declining in the U.S. because of impact of COVID-19 mortality. Up to 1 full year less with overall groups, but a 2.7-year decline for African Americans. How would you address this issue and ensure inequalities in access and administration to both COVID-19 vaccinations and appropriate levels of healthcare are available for historically disadvantaged communities? We have 60 seconds. We'll start with you, Mr. Perryman.
Sure. When I look at this problem, I look at it as an equity issue in the way we go about doing it. So with the vaccination rollout, what the problem is that we tie that to the population. Really, it should be tied to the risk level. And so this is one of the things that we could have changed to make sure that we're getting to the high risk populations throughout the Commonwealth, because we're not all equal just based on the number of people you have. So I'm really pleased that this session we saw a resolution that would declare racism as a public health crisis, because there's a reason why so many Black and brown people are being impacted by COVID. It's the lack of healthcare that we've seen, the infrastructure that's lacking. And so this is all that needs to be addressed in order to give better results as it relates to vaccination and healthcare generally.
Delegate Rasul.
Thank you for that. My three-part COVID recovery plan, especially for marginalized communities and for communities of color, is around, especially with my background in healthcare, is around three pieces: healthcare, education, and the economy. From a healthcare perspective, ensuring that we have equitable access to the vaccine. Where we have seen that has not worked, we need to make sure that we are doing better. Second, with regards to education, we have seen that marginalized communities, Black and brown schools in particular, have not received the support that they need and the funding to protect teachers, and especially the funding that they will need to help pick up on some of the education lag that is occurring. And then lastly, from an economic perspective, we have seen especially women of color hit economically the hardest. And so I've released a Marshall Plan for Moms that outlines in detail what we need to be doing to uplift women and uplift working families, especially during this difficult time.
Delegate Guzman.
Thank you. To address the coronavirus, I introduced legislation during the special session to have paid sick time and quarantine pay time off. For me, that was the only way that we could prevent this pandemic to spread around. This pandemic has shown us what healthcare is about. So to starters, we need paid sick days for everyone so people could stay home. we need also health insurance for everybody. So everybody, health care is a human right and not a privilege. So we must have policies so everybody have health insurance. And finally, we need also telemedicine. So people cannot take off from work to go to the doctor, so they can do it from the commodity from their home. But we need to do that by having broadband access to every zip code in Virginia.
Councilmember McClellan.
My entire campaign is about the idea of access, and the access to the vaccines has been problematic at the local level. And indeed, we leaned in on this issue early on. Our region, Hampton Roads, was one of the last to go into phase 1B, and we wrote a letter to the governor. I signed it as chair of the Hampton Roads Planning District Commission in mid-January, talking about some of the issues that we were seeing on the ground. The city of Norfolk, we actually stood up our own call center about 5 weeks before the state did, because we recognized that individuals who didn't have access to the internet couldn't get registered, or didn't have access to an email address, couldn't get registered for vaccines. We set up registration out in the community at our community centers and with our churches to ensure that folks had more access to that COVID vaccine pre-registration. We've been using our data from our civic lab to map areas of low, moderate income and communities of color to ensure that we are prioritizing those in the vaccine distribution. Listen, I'm the only candidate here who has local government options and experience, and I bring that to the table to Richmond.
Delegate Ayala.
Thank you, Rashad, for that question. Look, we know that the Virginia House of Delegates in the majority passed legislation to increase medical staff vaccinations, but also to make sure that we're tracking how vaccines are being distributed, which speaks to the heart of your question. We are now 9th number in the nation for vaccination doses. We are averaging more than 50,000 vaccinations per day over the past few weeks. We have been working with Governor Northam, following the science and listening to our healthcare professionals. We are working to not only become number one, but continually getting vaccinations in the arms of every Virginian. So this is what the Democratic majority will do. This is what we'll do to continue the work as Lieutenant Governor. And I'll be more than happy to champion additional legislation that should come forth and within the body.
Mr. Warren.
Yes, we know that COVID has disproportionately hurt and higher death rates in the Black community. I think we need to do more. We need to meet them where they are and make sure we get the shots in their arms. Also, I want to be able to focus on preventative care. Preventative care, so people will no longer could break this generational chain of these health issues, so they no longer be in this position, and we could get healthy workers so they get in jobs with livable wage and be able to take care of themselves and be supportive of them. Also, other racial justice issues, we need to be able to protect Asians and Muslims from domestic terrorism. And also, I wanted to see us be able to focus on our veterans. A lot of Black and brown people go into the military to serve, but also for the economic benefits. We need to take care of them when they return home.
Delegate Levine.
Rashad, when I heard that statistic, I was saddened, but I can't say I was surprised. Let's face it, it all relates to the systemic racism that pervades our society, and all relates to income inequality. Black and brown people, immigrants, they live in smaller homes, they live in closer quarters. Folks have to take public transportation more than white people do, and many of them are not in desk jobs. Many folks are out in the communities, whether it's driving a bus or taking some of those low-wage jobs that we're trying very much to increase. And then you've got the healthcare system, where we all know from statistics that doctors have shown that they say that the pain of a Black person is not as much the pain of a white person. There is a systemic racism that pervades every aspect of our society. And that's why I am proud of the work we did with vaccination, saying that we need to require Virginia to look at this data to cover all our communities. But let's face it, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. And constituents have come to me tend to know how to work the system. So we've reached out, I actually worked out to an immigrant community in my district to make sure that people who didn't ask for the vaccine were getting the vaccine, and putting it in English and in Spanish, and making sure that people have no access to the internet as well.
And Mr. Goldman.
Back in 2012, based on something I'd read from the Obama administration, we put together an innovative program in Richmond. I got some of the doctors to come in, the sixth graders, and we discovered, to give them free tests, that 80 to 90% of them weren't seeing They weren't seeing doctors regularly, even though Medicare and others would cover it. And we found that the doctors wouldn't do it. The doctors thought they just wouldn't do it. And one of the things that struck me at the time is, in Richmond, and I think it's true all over the state, you have to show that you got a medical exam to get into the system. But then you never ever have to show that your family or a doctor saw you again unless you want to go out for sport. There's no state in the country that really requires students to periodically get medical tests to show that their parents are doing it. I think if we would do something like that, because this COVID thing's going to be over, hopefully, that we will discover that if we force the parents and doctors to regularly give the kids what they're entitled, we will have a dramatic effect for no extra money on the health of everybody.
All right, thank you all. Now moving to the next question. From county to county, there are differences in the numbers, operating hours, and distance traveled to a polling place. What actions would you take within your purview to prevent the closing of polling places and other forms of voter suppression? We each have 60 seconds. We'll start with Delegate Ayala.
Thank you. Well, I'm proud to be chief co-patron of the bill, or the omnibus bills of voting rights that we passed in the House of Delegates this year or last year. And I extended polling hours as well as made same-day voting registration. And we were also the first state to pass Voting Rights Act, the first Southern state. So we have moved towards this very question that you've proposed, Rashad, and that we're going to continue to be number 2, as we were 49th in the state and amongst all states for voting rights. So we have made progress. We will continue to make progress. And as Lieutenant Governor, I'll continue to fight for voting rights and access to the box, as well as eliminated obstacles or any types of voter suppression.
Delegate Levine.
So as a member of the Privileges and Elections Committee, I am very proud of the work we've done just in a year to transform Virginia with massive early voting, yes, I'm also co-patron of the Voting Rights Act, with everything from increased drop boxes and mail-in voting and increased voting for people with disabilities. My legislation is the one that removed the requirement that you have to have a voter ID. That's gone. No excuse voting. I've written legislation to require paper ballots so that we can verify the vote count. We have done a lot. Now, there's still some things we need to do. We need to get, we have to wait till the calendar comes around. We're going to do prepaid postage for ballots. But to answer your question, we shouldn't ever be closing precincts. We did Sunday voting. That's really important too, with Souls to the Polls, pre-registration of 16 and 17-year-olds. We've done a lot of voting legislation that we can be proud of at a time when, frankly, a lot of other states are going the other direction. Virginia's led the way here.
Mr. Warren.
Yes, I will lead the effort to be able to implement automatic voter registration. Voting is right. I believe automatically when you become the voting age and you become a resident in Virginia, you automatically sign up to vote. And also we need to be able to restore rights, voting rights to former inmates. As soon as they serve their time, they should be able to have the right to vote and come back in society. Thank you.
Mr. Perryman.
I think at this point we should talk about what the lieutenant governor can and can't do. It's we've talked a lot about legislation and what other people have done, and I'm sure everyone here is very accomplished. But the lieutenant governor role, you break ties, you preside over the Senate, where you really have the influence. It's the powers and the influence, how you can lead other people to ideas. And what I have done here in Fairfax County, I haven't had power as a Fairfax County president in the largest county in Virginia. I have fought for increased access to the ballot. Just this fall, when we had 4-hour lines, I fought to extend the hours. I fought and advocated for people. And that's what you need from a lieutenant governor, because they're not going to be able to introduce legislation. They're going to have to persuade their colleagues. They're going to have to educate the public. And that's how they're going to make things happen. So this is what I think the distinction is when we talk about how are we going to get these things done. We all agree on access to the ballot. I think some of us have more radical ideas about maybe full access, even for those in prison, which, like myself, I believe that. We need to talk about how we're going to get those ideas across to the public and to the state Senate. Thank you.
Delegate Guzman.
Sure, we have made great progress with Democrats in the majority, but the reality is that that is up to the majority. So as I am the Lieutenant Governor Democratic nominee, I pledge to campaign across this Commonwealth to ensure that Democrats are elected up and down the ballot. I would like to implement a statewide vote by mail program, much like in Colorado and Oregon, so we can increase voter participation at 75%. But all of the legislation that we have passed could just go away if we ever lose the majority. So we have to protect the majority, but if possible, we must write it in the Constitution and through a constitutional amendment declare that voter suppression is illegal in the Commonwealth.
Mr. Goldman.
Well, I just think you just saw what I did. I mean, when everybody else was a deer in the headlights, Lee Carter and I went to court because we knew there'd be nobody running. There'd be no access to the ballot. If you had to get 10,000 in-person signatures, which would take you 15,000 given the error rate, we wouldn't have any candidates this year. So what do? We put our own time, our own money in it. And so now everybody's been able to get electronic signatures, a big difference. I went to court. When you used to get knocked off the ballot in Virginia, you had no due process. Registrar knocked you off, you had no automatic right. I got Cuccinelli in the legislature. Now anybody that gets knocked off the ballot, automatic right to appeal. You don't have to have a big fancy lawyer. So what would Paul Goldman do on all these things? What he's always done. You see a problem, you go out and you fix it.
Councilmember McClellan.
First of all, Mr. Goldman, thank you for your effort. I think we all are very appreciative of what you and Lee Carter did. So thank you very much. There have been a lot of great ideas shared here tonight. One of the things that I would like to stress, though, as we think about all of these changes to voter registration, early voting, et cetera, there's a cost to all of this. And oftentimes what happens in Richmond comes down to the local level in an unfunded mandate. And I've seen that at our local registrar's office. So as we can consider these changes that are important and things that I support, we also need to provide the budget and the revenues to help implement those changes at the local level. Again, I'm the only candidate who understands how things work at the city and the county and town level, and I bring that experience to Richmond to translate what happens on Main Street to Richmond and back again. So thank you very much.
Delegate Rasul.
Yeah, I actually want to second a little bit of what Sean was saying. Using our platform, even during this campaign, to say that there is nothing more important to be talking about right now than to be putting immense pressure on the federal government and the United States Senate to pass a comprehensive bill that reinstates the Voting Rights Act. Today, that is the single most important thing that we can do. And we need to be utilizing our platform to say, Congress, now is your time. We see what's happening in Georgia. I've been sitting on the Privileges and Elections Committee for 8 years. And I try not to be actually very hyperpartisan, but I have seen the onslaught from Republicans. And they are committed to taking away our ability to be able to vote, especially in Black and Brown communities. So there's a lot that has been said as far as great policies, but today we need to stand united.
All right, thank you all. Now we're going to move it back over to Susan. Susan.
Thank you. We're going to move on to questions about environmental justice in Virginia. The Biden administration ran on the platform of transitioning our grid to 100% renewables by 2035 in order to follow climate science. Do you agree with this timeline to transition to clean renewables? Why or why not? And what is your plan to accomplish this timeline, especially given Dominion's influence over our politics? Councilmember McClellan.
Oh, I'm so glad that you asked this question. Listen, I'm so excited that we have a Biden administration and one that appreciates science. I've been working on issues of the environment for my entire tenure and before when I was on the Planning Commission. As we talk about climate change, we need to talk about both mitigation and reducing our carbon footprint, adopting clean renewable energy, but we also need to be talking about adaptation measures. And that's been missing at the General Assembly in Richmond. Climate change isn't a future issue, it is a now issue. The road that I drive to City Hall is often flooded on sunny days several times a month because of sea level rise. And we have very little money in our budget or resources supporting adaptation issues. So we need to both be talking about mitigation as well as adaptation. I think that we need a Commonwealth Flood Board to address flooding Commonwealth-wise, because it's not just a coastal issue, it's an issue in Roanoke and Stanton and Alexandria and Chesterfield. And that's one of the things that I would like to focus on as Lieutenant Governor.
Thank you, Councilmember McClelland. Mr. Goldman.
Well, you know, Henry Howell and I were fighting Dominion when it was VEPCO. We went after Tom, well, it wasn't Tom Farrell, it was somebody else then. Tom Farrell, we stopped him from getting the Coliseum, getting that sweetheart deal for the Coliseum. And then just the fact that Henry fought him. Tom Farrell and his crowd, they tried to take away the elected school board, which Wilder had given the city of Richmond. I helped get people, they also opposed us when we tried to get the elected mayor of Richmond, which we got. I led that fight. First time African Americans ever had the right to vote in the city of Richmond. I'm not taking any money from Mr. Farrell. I'm not saying anything nasty about him. I guess he gets a 30-second rebuttal, huh? Because I mentioned his name. But the fact of the matter is, Dominion has too much influence, has always had too much influence, and Henry Howe's the only guy who's really fought it the way it's got to be fought. I said enough about Mr. Farrell and Dominion. Get them out of the way, and 235 is too slow. We got to do it by at least 230.
Thank you, Mr. Goldman. Mr. Warren.
Science has showed that if we don't change what we're doing with climate change, my home by the sea, Hampton University, in 100 years will be underwater. Our historically Black college will be underwater. And you think about the other peninsulas and people in Westmoreland and other people on the coast, in Norfolk, in Chesapeake, what they're suffering in Virginia Beach as well. You know, I believe that we need to invest in solar panel farms. There are 3 major projects going on in Pennsylvania County right now. We need to also invest in clean energy jobs, but also focus in incentivizing people to get electric vehicles. While we're at it, to lead with environmental issues, we need to also retrain the folks or coal miners in the Western Sphere, but also support our farmers to use more sustainable practices. And those, the type of leadership that I continue to bring at Lieutenant Governor.
Thank you, Mr. Warren. Delegate Ayala.
Thank you so much. Well, as a national security specialist, I know that climate change is a national security threat. Virginia is home to 27 military bases, but many of them are coastal, and the rising sea levels threaten many of our bases, including Norfolk Naval Base. Our Commonwealth must do more to combat this change to ensure that its continued economic strength, security, and prosperity. So we know that it is disproportionately climate change hurts Black and Brown communities who are currently being affected by blue lining. The oldest Black community in Virginia, SeaTac in Virginia Beach, is the center of residential flooding, and Churchill, a historically Black community in Richmond, has an average temperature of 2 to 3 degrees higher. So combating climate change is part of the movement for racial justice and a greener Virginia. And we must reinvest in our communities who have been disproportionately hurt by climate change. In the GA, I have prioritized this, including supporting the Virginia Clean Economy Act, which I have been co-patron on, which is a landmark legislation. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Ayala. Delegate Levine.
So I didn't take money from Dominion before not taking money from Dominion was cool. I never have, way back in 2015, never will. This is a regulated monopoly. We control it. It shouldn't control us. Look, climate change is a real, present, and severe problem. One day soon, I hope the pandemic will end, but climate change is like that tide coming to the shore. It is closer and closer. We already see its effects. The time to act is not 2035. The time to act was 30 years ago. But I do think we can get it done by 2035. We've already taken some steps. We haven't gone near far enough. We got rid of the Atlantic Coast Pipeline. We haven't gotten rid of the Mountain Valley Pipeline yet. We've protected communities like Union Hill, historically African-American community from freed slaves founded that community. And yet we all know that environmental justice means that a lot of these pipelines and things go right in the communities of the people who are least able to fight back. All kudos to Union Hill for being able to fight back. In Alexandria, I actually sponsored a study to deal with urban flooding, because it's not just coastal flooding. It's urban flooding we've had.
Thank you, Delegate Levine. Mr. Perryman.
So the climate crisis is absolutely an existential crisis. It's a national security crisis. I think most of us would agree to that. As far as to your question, I think we need campaign finance reform across the board. I don't take any money from Dominion or corporations. And the reason for that is because they have so much undue influence here. We can't just target one company and think we've solved it because we'll just trade one out for another. If we really want to get serious and see the progress in the Commonwealth of Virginia, we have to get the influence of money out of our politics. That's first and foremost. But to the people here, you can go to Perry for Virginia. I talk about the moratorium on fossil fuels, how we need to envision a clean environment. It's not enough to just introduce legislation. It's absolutely shameful that the Green New Deal has not gone far enough. It hasn't even been assigned to a committee this year. We have to have people who are fighting to get legislation introduced and passed and bringing along people with them.
Thank you, Mr. Perryman. Delegate Rasool.
Thank you for the question. The fundamental part of the first question was about the timeline, and is the timeline aggressive enough? When you really think about this longitudinally, we have struggled with one major piece. It's the coalition, right? When we talk about this in just a silo of here's the answer to the climate crisis, the problem is we need to use the climate crisis as an excuse to be able to uplift economic and environmental justice communities that need us. Why not battle these crises together? That's the vision of a Green New Deal. It's an economic plan. It's an environmental plan. It's a social and racial justice plan. I've got these battle scars from battling Dominion, being on the front lines with the Atlantic Coast Pipeline fighters and the Mountain Valley Pipeline fighters. Look, what we need to be able to do is stand up together, and that's why our campaign is 100% funded by individuals only. It all begins with a moratorium on fossil fuel infrastructure and making sure that we uplift families that need.
Thank you, Delegate Rasool. Delegate Guzman.
Thank you. I'm proud to announce that I got A+ rating from the Sierra Club every year since I was elected, actually an A with an extra credit. And I've been a legislative leader awarded by the League of Conservation Voters as well. As the founding mother of the Virginia Green New Deal Coalition, I was able to pass that resolution at the national level through the National Hispanic Caucus of State Legislators, because I'm the Southern Region Chair. But there's still so much to do here in Virginia. We have to restore power to the SEC to have greater oversight on regulated energy companies in Virginia. We need to continue to hold corporate polluters accountable. And in the Senate, I'll share the experiences of what differences it has made in the House, just not to take money from Dominion and convince senators to do the same. I will continue to review. We have to continue to review our proposed projects using a race equity lens. We need the Environmental Justice Interagency Work Group that was killed during the last day of session. Breaking up the power monopoly as well is extremely important.
Thank you, Delegate Guzman. One lightning round question for environmental justice. Will you support a moratorium on new fossil fuel infrastructure and on new permits for pending fossil fuel projects? Yes or no only, please. Delegate Levine.
Yes.
Delegate Ayala.
Yes.
Delegate Guzman.
Yes.
Mr. Perryman.
Yes.
Mr. Goldman.
Yes, but if you stop them, you've got to be prepared to pay. You might have to pay millions of dollars.
Delegate Rasool.
Yes.
Mr. Warren.
Yes.
Councilmember McClellan.
Yes.
Great, thank you very much. I'm going to hand it back over to Rashad.
We move on to other issues of justice and fairness. The lieutenant governor is required to sit on numerous boards and commissions. Does Virginia adequately have a board that fully addresses gender and sexuality equality? If not, will you help create one? If so, what should be on the agenda? Each have 60 seconds. We'll start with Mr. Perryman.
I don't believe such a board exists, and I think it should. I think we absolutely need to address that. And I think what we would talk about is some of the gaps that we see for the LGBTQ plus community, both in healthcare and housing and education, and really having a targeted outreach program and policy recommendations targeted for that community. So that's what I would recommend for that sort of board.
Delegate Ayala.
Sorry, you're speaking to my language. I am a women's rights activist, so I don't believe that, again, that board exists, but I think we can build upon the momentum by passing, as we've done, passing the Equal Rights Amendment. So yes, I would be for it. I would say, first and foremost, paid family medical leave and equal pay for equal work would be on the top lines, because this is the just part of the conversation. It's the floor, not the ceiling, and absolutely would support it. And I would love to see it, as well as adapting CEDAW, which is about the Violence Against Women Act.
Delegate Levine.
So this is actually a bill that I chief co-patron. Folks, you may not know it exists, but it's coming around the corner. We have created the LGBT plus advisory board. It will start in July, when I assume the governor will sign our legislation, and it will start in July. I'm very proud of my fight I've led for 25 years for the rainbow community. And that includes marching against Hollywood when they didn't have positive representations of gay and lesbian folks, to the marriage equality movement at a time when it didn't exist anywhere in the country, to writing DC's marriage equality law, to passing the most comprehensive gay rights, trans rights, bi rights, queer rights legislation in Virginia history just last year. I would be the first openly gay lieutenant governor in the United States. I'm proud of that, but I'm more proud of my activism, because I fought for these rights at a time when no one did. When the gay community told me it was impossible, we were doing civil disobedience and trying to get married and Valentine's Day protests 20 years ago. This is a fight that I've long fought for, and I was proud to chief co-patron the creation of the LGBT plus advisory board that goes into effect in July.
Mr. Warren.
I believe in inclusion. If you go to my website right now, Xavier, FOR for Virginia spelled out.com, you'll see that I state, I believe everyone should have a seat at the table. I'm talking about individuals, for gay individuals, Latinx, Hispanics, also focusing on people who are Christians, Muslim. I believe everyone should have a seat at the table. We need to have Virginia and our state offices to reflect who we are and our values. That's how we're going to lead Virginia forward and into the future.
Delegate Rasul.
You know, part of our campaign, we have an initiative called the People's Platform. And what we do is we invite people from all over the Commonwealth to give us different ideas. And some of the leaders here locally of our local indivisible came together and said, what we need is a variety of different ways to uplift women. And they said, let's first advocate for a Marshall Plan for moms. And we took it a step further and said, as part of my office as lieutenant governor, that I would have a director there specifically focused on these issues, a full-time person, not just because we need one board, because one board isn't going to solve this. We need to make sure that we are aggressively challenging every policy and every board, that we bring that equity. A few things, this position as a delegate is not even made really for women. It's made for rich white men mainly. We need to make sure that this is full-time, so that way all kinds of people can serve in these positions, and that way we can truly have a representative form of government.
Councilmember McClellan.
Listen, discrimination, hatred, bigotry, they have no place in the Commonwealth. Love always trumps hate, and that has been something that's been guiding me for many years. I'm very proud of the allyship that I've maintained here in the Hampton Roads region. I've been voted best ally and best politician by Outlier 757, and recently received the endorsement of Jay Fassett, the first openly gay elected official in local official in Virginia. One of the first things that I did on city council was to sponsor discrimination ordinance or non-discrimination ordinance. And listen, as lieutenant governor, I would love to be the chief engagement officer. Civic engagement, looking at our boards and commissions and ensuring that we have more people, more voices at the table is going to be really important. I think that we should strive to become the Commonwealth that cares, and civic engagement will be one of my #1 priorities.
Mr. Goldman.
Well, Henry Howell and I were fighting for the Equal Rights Amendment in the 70s when it wasn't particularly popular. I'm surprised people have forgotten about Edie Harrison, one of the great fighters for the Equal Rights Amendment, the first woman ever nominated by the Democratic Party. And I had to help them. The women didn't want to nominate it. The party was against her. We fought it. We got her the nomination. Remember when VMI wouldn't admit women? Who do you think was the only person on the Council of Higher Education? I had to oppose my own governor, and I said it's unconstitutional. They threw me off the board next year, but I knew Ruth Bader Ginsburg had my back. And one of the reasons I'm fighting so hard for these new schools, have you ever seen the bathrooms, particularly for the women in the sports facilities, for women in these rundown, obsolete schools? It's atrocious. They won't even fix them up. And I'm surprised we haven't heard more about education so far. That is the great equalizer, said Dr. King, and and I think he knows a few things about that.
And Delegate Guzman.
Thank you. I agree that I'm excited that we created the board to address the LGBTQ issues. But I've been working in the human services field for the last 17 years here in Virginia, helping people in need, and that includes the LGBTQ community. So, for example, we don't have a shelter for an LGBTQ runaway to go and they can stay overnight in a place respected by the gender that they identify themselves, and that is a problem. We have Latinas and African American females making 55 cents compared to $1 that a man makes, and that is because we have failed to hold the private sector accountable to to compensate females equally than males. We have to as we create these boards, we have to diversify the membership as well, not only racially, but also regionally. So we have representations from different regions. We are here not only to talk the talk, but actually to walk the walk. I'm proud to have the most diversity field of staff and also consultants.
Thank you all. Moving to the next question. As Lieutenant Governor, what would you do to support and empower Virginians with disabilities? You have 60 seconds. We'll start with Delegate Rasul.
Thank you so much for that question. What I have seen time and time again in our budget and in the way we approach a number of policies is that we leave people behind. Fundamentally, a society is only as good as we are when we treat everyone equitably. And so here, one of the biggest travesties that we have in Virginia is the long waiting list that we have for disability waivers. If you talk to these families that are struggling, that are waiting for these disability waivers, they don't know how to make it from one day to another. And so what we need to do, while we have a large sum of money banked away in our rainy day funds, is to say, especially with these families that are struggling, bring down those waivers. Make sure that we continue to hold businesses accountable with regards to the way that we treat and employ people with disabilities. And just as important is thinking through many different policies that allow for us to help. Thank you so much.
Mr. Warren.
We need to support the handicapped community. I think about Sherry, who's a supporter of my campaign, who's a quadriplegic, and I really connected with her because she's an e-blogger and someone that is a small business owner. And we connected and talked about even how buildings try to skirt around curves to avoid from giving access to buildings and try to surpass permits to be able to help people with handicap and disabilities. I think we need to meet these individuals where they are. They are some of our best and brightest and contributors to society, and I'm here to support them.
Councilmember McClellan.
Listen, access again is a theme of my campaign, and ensuring that differently abled people have access to the same opportunities as able-bodied folks is a cornerstone of everything that I'm about. One of the things that I've been doing at the local level, I'm the vice chair of our public transit system, and working with our disabilities committee and commission to ensure that we have adequate, reliable, safe transit for people with disabilities has been key to one of the things that I've done here, as well as the work that I've done as a board chair for the Up Center and working with the disabled community for many, many years, and something that I would carry with me as Lieutenant Governor to Richmond.
Delegate Levine.
So I crafted the bill that the original version of the Virginia Values Act back in 2020 that gave a full panoply of non-discrimination rights, not just the rainbow community, not just on the basis of race, gender, and national origin, but also on disabilities. And disability was taken out. So this year, I chief co-patroned a bill to put it back in, and we succeeded this year. And people with disabilities have all the panoply of protections that everyone else has been discriminated against have. And I'm very proud of that. It is a problem with people waiting for ID and DD waivers. It's a terrible problem. But it's also a matter of education. One of my bills was a bill to train teachers to deal with de-escalation. I've been trying to teach police to deal with de-escalation as well, because people with certain mental health problems don't always react the same way. Autistic kids in a classroom don't always react the same way as kids that aren't autistic. And teaching de-escalation techniques, teaching folks to be aware of mental health issues. One bill I was very proud to co-patron was in the criminal justice system to take account of that in criminal sentencing.
Delegate Guzman.
Thank you. I'm proud to announce that I got an award by the Disability Caucus within the Democratic Party for being a champion for the disability community. I introduce a budget amendment every year, with the exception of this last year, to get rid of the DD waiver waiting list. I passed legislation to create an alternative application process so we can increase the number of employment with people with disabilities. But one thing that we have not touched, that I've been a champion on, is on special education. We have failed the children with the special education needs in the current public education system. And it's something that we must address, since these children come into kindergarten through until they graduate. Because right now we don't have systems in place. It's so hard to get an IEP. Administrators don't have the right training to assess people with disabilities. People with disabilities in the schools are being bullied, and we have to address those needs sooner rather than later. Thank you.
Mr. Perryman.
Yes, I agree with what a lot that was said. Of course, the waivers is a huge issue, and I won't belabor that point since it's been mentioned twice now. But the other thing I would say is, as an advocate myself in NAACP, I stood a lot and worked a lot with advocates in that community, because what we see in our school systems is issues of restraint and seclusion. Too often, students with disabilities are disproportionately punished. This is something that we need to advocate for in the LG role. The other thing that I would mention too is that we've just seen the creation of an Office of Civil Rights in the Attorney General's office. We should always remember that civil rights is not just for Black and brown people, it's not just for women, it's for those in the community who may be differently abled. So we have to absolutely make sure we're using the full power of the state to advocate for that community.
Delegate Ayala.
Thank you. Well, we do have the Virginians with Disabilities Act that was signed into legislation by former Governor Chuck Robb in 1985. We have the Office for Protection Agency. We have the Office of Aging, Deaf and Hearing, Education, Health, and also mental health. And we have the Department of Behavioral Health and Services, but we can expand upon that with our outreach or the new chair that was created by Governor Northam, which is talking about diversity and inclusion, and talk about what we can do to dedicate full-time, agency members to work with these particular offices to expand upon our already existing laws and infrastructures. Look, I live this. My son is on the spectrum and has been through this all of my life. I fought the education system and worked to provide protections and mechanisms, and especially when you have a Black child or a brown child, these educational infrastructures sometimes disproportionately impact your children. So I'm a fighter, carried the legislation in the House to increase IDD waivers. Oh, sorry, didn't hear you. Thank you.
Mr. Goldman.
Yes, I thank Sam for mentioning the rainy day fund, providing a lot of money for social services. That's my idea. I gave it to Governor Wilder. It's an interesting story how it became law. Look, I confess I haven't thought much about the disabilities until we had to get into a fight over how we're fixing up the schools in Richmond. And Carol Wolf, the school board, did a great job educating all of us on the need to fix the school buildings. It cost a lot of money, but it was certainly the right thing to do, and I applaud her. It just so happens last other night, somebody contacted me talking about these kinds of things. I said, Mr. Goldman, would you support having males being able to be in the shower with other males who needed disabled individuals who needed that help? I never thought about that. I never thought about that, and we've gone back and forth over it. So we all need to get more sensitive to this, and certainly the lieutenant governor has to get more sensitive to this. There's no question about it. But I'm going to say this: having served lieutenant governor, some of the most famous ones, all these boards and commissions ain't worth a whole lot.
All right, thank you. Now moving on to another lightning round question. Would you cease collaboration between Virginia law enforcement and ICE? Yes or no answers or brief one-sentence responses. We'll start with Delegate Ayala.
Yes.
All right, Dr. Goldman, or Mr. Goldman.
I'm a lawyer. To say that the state can disregard federal law, that's a really thorny answer. So you're going to ask me yes or no, I'm going to have to say no.
Mr. Perryman.
I would say yes, and I would also add that state law enforcement never has to use their resources to cooperate with federal government. So absolutely yes.
Delegate Guzman.
Yes, I did it in Prince William County. We love to do it statewide.
Councilmember McClellan.
Yes.
Delegate Levine.
They can legally do it, and I fought for it, and we've succeeded.
Delegate Rasul.
Yes, we can absolutely pass these laws.
And Mr. Warren.
Yes, America was built by immigrants. We need to protect them.
All right, now moving over back to Susan.
All right, thank you. We conclude with questions of clean government. What do you view as the major components of comprehensive campaign finance reform? And what level of limitations would you accept? Do you believe that Virginia should enact a system of public financing of campaigns? You have 60 seconds. Mr. Warren.
Yeah, so I believe the people voice should be the ones that lead our government. And that's the reason why I'm running. And that's the reason why I'm here. Yes, we should be able to look at how we could be able to make it a fair opportunity that anyone that's watching and anyone that has an ambition and heart to be able to serve Virginians could be able to run for office. Also, I want to be clear that we should be take it very serious, because if we hamper it and we put the wrong laws in place, then only wealthy individuals could be able to run, because they could be able to self-finance themselves. And so, but I think we need to definitely exclude corporate financing. They shouldn't have any part in how we actually govern. But also, I think we should be able to be supportive, and the people's voice should be the ultimate choice of how we govern. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Warren. Delegate Levine.
I have all my life supported public financing of campaigns. I'm the only member of the House that introduced legislation in Virginia to cap the donations. I tried to cap it just at the federal level. It was considered such a radical idea that the Democrats wouldn't let it out of committee, and much less the Republicans. We do need to get money out of politics as much as possible. We need to ban corporate giving. If you have for-profits giving, what are they getting back for it? I've long said, you've got a for-profit corporation. Are they wasting their money and throwing it away? In which case they're not acting in their shareholders' interest. Or are they buying legislators, which is a form of legalized bribery? We absolutely need public financing of campaigns. And also, we have lobbyists who watch everything that goes on. But I'm the leader of the Virginia Transparency Caucus. I'm the guy that brought you public hearings so that you can watch every committee meeting streamed and archived, every vote being recorded. It shouldn't only be about the lobbyists. It should be about ordinary Virginians, which is why I, as Lieutenant Governor, would travel around the state and be that conduit around the lobbyists, around the big corporations.
Time.
Thank you, Delegate Levine. Delegate Guzman.
Thank you. Well, I would like to correct the record, because I did introduce legislation to prohibit donations from corporations and business entities, and to cap those donations, like the federal government, to $700. My campaign for the House of Delegates have endorsed not once, but twice by End Citizens United. And to be honest with you, I would love not to spend a lot of hours on the calling for dollars, because these communications program organizations are making a lot of money on the time that we spend on the phone. I would love to be speaking with voters and have forums like this. So voters need to know what are we offering and get to know the candidates and select the best candidate and not select the candidate that has the most money and can communicate the most.
Thank you, Delegate Guzman. Councilmember McClellan.
I agree with everything that's been said. Listen, our system is obviously broken and it needs serious reform. The Republicans have called Virginia the Wild West of campaign finance. We need to do all sorts of things, including, for example, banning the use of campaign funds for anything other than perhaps childcare. I was very sad to see that did not pass in this year's General Assembly. We need to be looking at campaign finance limits, corporate donations, et cetera. Until we do this across the board, though, I don't know that Democrats need to, we're going to be up against a very well-financed Republican set of candidates in November 2021. And so unfortunately, at this point, until we have across the board campaign finance reform, we are going to be competing with them. And I think that's, it's really sad and very unfortunate. And I hope the future General Assemblies will be able to pass campaign finance reform, and I'll certainly support that as Lieutenant Governor.
Thank you, Councilmember McClellan. Delegate Ayala.
Thank you for the question. You know, Virginia is commonly called the Wild Wild West of fundraising because we're so relaxed in our campaign finance laws. And in the General Assembly, I have been a leader to push for clean governance. Look, this session, I was proud to co-patron legislation to ban personal use of campaign contributions with a child care exception. And as Lieutenant Governor, I will continue to advocate for this legislation and will be the tie-breaking vote to finally bring campaign finance reform to Virginia. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Ayala. Mr. Perryman.
So to answer your question, yes, I would support a public finance system, but I want to be clear here, and maybe this will stand out a little bit. I don't think corporate donations is a problem. I think the problem is contribution limits. Whether you're getting your money, $100,000 from an LLC or from Joe Smith down the block, they are still having influence over you. And so we absolutely have to have limits on our contributions. That's both for corporations and for people. So that's the distinction I want to make here in Virginia. Right now, it's completely legal for someone to give you $100,000, you to take that, vote on a bill that they care about, and then go take that money out of your account and go buy a car. That's absurd. That's not what should be happening here. And it doesn't matter whether it's a corporation or a person. There should be limits on what they can give. And so that's what I would support.
Thank you, Mr. Perryman. Mr. Goldman.
Well, I'm the only party chairman in the history of the state that's ever come out for serious campaign limits. And you try doing that to the Democratic Party in the 1990s. I got the governor, Wilder, created a commission. I don't know if anybody's actually read it. I'm sure some of that stuff's more radical than anything you're all going to have to come up with. I'm not taking more than $2,800 from anybody, no corporations, nothing, the federal limits. If you're not doing that, you can talk all you want about this, that, and the other thing. But, you know, I just don't talk about things. We actually tried to do it. You're not going to get public financing in this state. I don't see it. We could even get those things back then. Maybe things have changed. It doesn't look like it based on what Mr. McClellan said. So the bottom line is we're going to either have to get a new soul in the Democratic Party, you get new people in there if you truly want. But we can lead by example. And if you're taking $100,000 now, you're sending the wrong signal if you really want people to think you're for campaign finance.
Time.
Thank you, Mr. Goldman. Delegate Rasool.
When I first came into the General Assembly in the beginning of 2014, I read this bill, utility bill, and I started asking some questions, and I realized, boy, this is just not good for the people. And I brought it back to folks, and I started letting people know, but no one was interested in the conversation. I found out just how quickly Dominion would come down on the General Assembly and stop any kind of conversation about fiddling with their bills because of all of the millions of dollars that they've been funneling in. Look, that's why we're 100% funded by individuals only, to send the message that we need serious campaign finance reform. And that's where we fell short over the past couple of sessions, to be honest about it. So we need to be doing things like banning donations from public service corporations, banning all corporate donations, bringing in public financing, but I have also introduced a constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United, joining many other states as well.
Thank you, Delegate Rasool. Now, a few lightning round questions on good government. Yes or no answers, please. Are you willing to support a ban on corporation contributions to politicians? Mr. Goldman.
Of course.
Councilmember McClellan.
Yes.
Delegate Rasool.
Yes.
Delegate Ayala.
I think you're talking about in Citizens United. Yes.
Delegate Guzman.
Yes.
Delegate Levine.
Yes.
Mr. Warren. Sorry, Mr. Warren.
Absolutely.
Mr. Perriman.
Yes.
Do you support automatic voter registration upon citizens turning 18 years old? Delegate Guzman.
Yes.
Mr. Warren.
I stated this earlier. I was a champion for it. Absolutely.
Mr. Perriman.
Yes.
Mr. Goldman.
Yes, it should be a right, not a privilege.
Councilmember McClellan.
Yes.
Delegate Rasool.
The new law is 16, so yes.
Delegate Ayala.
Yes, we did it already. So yes.
Delegate Levine.
Yes, that was one of my bills.
Do you believe that the Virginia General Assembly elected representatives should serve full-time and be compensated full-time in order to better address the full-time needs of the Virginia people? Councilmember McClellan.
Yes, and as should the Lieutenant Governor.
Delegate Rasool.
Yes.
Delegate Levine.
Yes, as should the Lieutenant Governor.
Delegate Ayala.
Could you repeat the question?
Do you believe that the Virginia General Assembly elected representatives should serve full-time and be compensated full-time in order to better address the full-time needs of Virginia people?
That is interesting. I'm not sure just yet, so I am a maybe.
Mr. Warren.
Yes, and I would be a full-time Lieutenant Governor.
Mr. Perriman.
Yes.
Delegate Guzman.
Yes.
Mr. Goldman.
No.
Do you agree that campaign contributions should not be used for personal expenses except for child care? Mr. Perriman.
Yes, 100%.
Delegate Guzman.
Yes.
Delegate Ayala.
We brought forth that legislation, just talked about it. So yes, I would support it.
Did we lose?
Councilmember McClellan.
Thank you. Yes.
Mr. Goldman.
Repeat the question, please.
Do you agree that campaign contributions should not be used for personal expenses except for child care?
No, it should only be used for campaign expenses, period.
Okay. Delegate Rasool.
Yes.
Mr. Warren.
Yes.
Delegate Levine.
Yes, I was a co-patron of that legislation and voted for it.
Okay. Just want to check, are you back on, Susan? All right, I'll move right along. Do you support the introduction of a statewide system of ranked choice voting? Delegate Guzman.
Yes.
Mr. Warren.
I'm for the people, so if the people vote for it, we should have it.
Mr. Goldman.
I don't know enough about it to say, so I could have said no. If it's yes or no, I'd have to say no.
Delegate Levine.
Yes.
Councilmember McClellan.
I'm open to it, but I think we need to study it more carefully, and I think we're going to see it in the Republican convention here shortly.
Mr. Perriman.
Yes.
Delegate Rasool.
Yes, and open primaries.
Delegate Ayala.
Yes.
All right. So we're going to move to the closing statements. So we are now concluding and moving to the closing statements. Candidates, you are now welcome to make any closing remarks. Each candidate will have 90 seconds, and we will start with Delegate Rasool. Again, 90 seconds.
Thank you so much to talk about an awesome crowd who has been able to moderate and put this together. What a well done event. So I'm very thankful that Virginia and the Democratic Party can certainly be proud of this event for sure. Look, we built a whole campaign around my 3 family values. Always tell the truth, always be kind, and never give up. And my wife and I raised our kids with that in mind. And we've been elevating that truth by integrating ideas from all across the Commonwealth into our People's Platform. We've been connecting people with the government services that they need and bring them the love that they deserve. And we've been visiting from tip to tip in Virginia, from Eastern Shore and Accomack County to Lee County, elevating stories that need to be elevated. The question is, how will we win? We will win through bold coalitions by taking these values, leading with them front and center. Voting is an emotional decision, not a logical one. Issues are very important, but what's most important are those relationships that are going to win. And I can't wait for us to unite Virginia through a platform based on these values. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Warren, you have 90 seconds.
Thank you for your time. I am Xavier Warren. And again, I want your vote to be Lieutenant Governor because Virginia is in a COVID crisis, a racial crisis, a climate crisis, and an economic crisis. Historically, the biggest opportunity for change is after a crisis. You know, we have an opportunity right now where we can be able to lead Virginia into the future. For all the policy ideas we have today, they actually come with a dollar figure. And I'm the only candidate that has secured millions of dollars in education funding, healthcare funding, and economic development. I want to be able to support you and your families. You know, Virginia used to be a leader in tobacco, textile, and agriculture. I want Virginia to be the leader in technology, healthcare innovation, and also clean energy jobs and helping families to build generational wealth. We need to close the racial generational wealth gap, and we need to be able to help people get back on their feet. It's our revolution is now. It's time that we need new leadership, new ideas, and a fresh start. I'm your candidate. Please visit Xavier for Virginia, FOR, VirginiaSpelledOut.com. Thank you and God bless.
Councilmember McClellan, 90 seconds.
Thanks to the great moderators and our hosts for this fun event. Listen, I'm proud to be a Virginia Democrat, and I'm very proud of what Virginia did in 2019 to take back control of our state government and what we did in our country with our victories last November and in January. These elections prove the power of grassroots activism and civic engagement to create a more just, economically robust, and inclusive democracy. I'm running for Lieutenant Governor with a background in local government that has provided me with experience of listening, of advocating, and being an ally for my constituents. And I'm looking forward to continuing the work that we have done and the progress we have made on criminal justice reform, addressing climate change and the digital divide, and stopping the GOP's attacks on our healthcare and our reproductive health system. But let's take a quick moment to talk about the GOP. While Democrats are building an inclusive new Virginia majority with this primary, the GOP is in its 4th month of arguing which party insiders will be granted permission to vote. Virginia Democrats are making tremendous gains among independents and centrists, while the GOP is tearing itself apart. I'm ready to take on whomever the GOP decides will be their lieutenant governor candidate from their messy convention. I'm bringing 30 years of experience in the private sector, the nonprofit arena, and the public sector, and I'm able to hit the ground running, and I'm ready to take on a statewide battle in November. Thanks so much for having me. Please go to AndreaForVirginia.com to learn more. I would love to earn your support and your vote. Thank you.
Mr. Goldman, 90 seconds.
You know, the Constitution of Virginia makes education the most important responsibility of the state government. I did not hear that tonight, folks. I'm sorry. I did not hear that. Unless I was at the wrong debate. Unless you get equal educational opportunity, this is the basis of the Virginia Democratic Party, is the Brown v. Board of Education decision. That's where it all comes from. I didn't hear that tonight. I really didn't. We are going to have to dedicate this state, get it back to what it was, education first. In 1986, you want to know where the education money's gone into this state? It's gone into the roads. It's gone into the college facilities. In 1986, the Democrats and Republicans made a decision to hijack the education tax, which was only supposed to go to educational localities, and now make it start paying for roads. 30% of that tax now goes for roads. You can do the math. Wilder said it in 1986. I tried to talk to McAuliffe about it in 2013. We tried to get the General Assembly to use a windfall tax on the internet nexus. Nothing. Everything. Roads, roads, roads. And now we're complaining there's no money for education. I'm the guy who got Wilder to take the lottery funds and put them into we can start using that for education. That is the basis of how we're going to make this society more equal. You want racial justice, civil rights. I'm the only person who's actually advised governors on financial policy. Hal and Wilder are well known. Anyway, thanks for having me. Great debate.
Delegate Levine, you have 90 seconds.
Thank you to debate hosts. This was a terrific debate. The 40 organizations or so that brought us together. Thank you to the hundreds who have listened to us for 2 hours. You've heard a bunch of good people, a lot of progressive people. How will you make a decision? It's not going to be easy. You could say I'm the second most progressive legislator in the House. If that's your theme. But I would say you can't really know us all from 90 seconds each, or even from 2 hours. For me, go to my website, levineforvirginia.com. Check out my Wikipedia page. I have a long history of progressive activism. And I think if you look at my life story, you'll see somebody who goes and fights against the odds. When they tell me it can't be done, that's when I roll up my sleeves and get to work. They said it couldn't be done in marriage equality. We rolled our sleeves, it got to work. They said I couldn't get justice for my sister. When I formed the Virginia Transparency Caucus and tried to change hundreds of years of secret committee meetings, they said it couldn't be done. I lost my mentor over it, but we got it done. You know, when I was deputy whip a session ago of the Democratic Caucus, I was the caucus goalie. I took the bills that passed the House and were uncontested passed the Senate, were uncontested on the House calendar. And I found 7 bills with mistakes in them, raised a problem, and got the governor to veto them, because legislation is about defense, not just offense. If you want someone who looks at the details, and I'm really glad to hear that others are taking up my theme of a full-time lieutenant governor that goes all across the Commonwealth, because folks are really split right now, and we can bring Virginia together if we have a voice of Virginia going around and spreading that voice to the government.
Delegate Guzman.
Thank you. Virginia progressives. Trump is not in the White House anymore, so we won't be able to use him to fire up our base. I'm a progressive Democrat that received endorsements from Joe Biden, Elizabeth Warren, and our revolution during my previous candidacies. If we're going to protect our trifecta in 2021, then we need a strong Democrat who is a proven leader that builds coalitions, someone who's willing to listen and fight unapologetically for our progressive values. I know this because I did it last year as the co-chair of the Bernie Sanders Virginia campaign and as a Berniecrat representing you at the DNC. Just like I did during my DNC campaign, my LG campaign is reaching out to every zip code in our Commonwealth. Our historic campaign has earned endorsements of several labor unions, our Revolution Richmond, and various progressive elected officials and activists. As a proud Latina immigrant, I know that immigrants' rights are human rights, and I've been endorsed by CASA in Action and Project ID for my fight to get driver's licenses and ID cards to every Virginia resident. So Virginia progressives, if you want to do something we've never done before, which is to elect a progressive woman of color as your next lieutenant governor, then we need to build something that's never been built before. I invite you to join Team Guzman because we have so much work to do, recover from this pandemic, achieve racial justice, and build a Virginia that is not only number one for business, but also for working families. I'm asking for your support tonight and your vote in the primary. Let's make history together. Thank you.
Delegate Ayala.
Thank you. Thank you to the hosts and the moderators of this People's Debate. As you've seen here tonight, there are many candidates who have a wide range of experiences and backgrounds, but I'm the only candidate on this stage that can build bridges and build on the successes of our Democratic majority and improve the lives of so many Virginians. It's one thing about talking about broadband expansion, I've done it. broadband utility across the Commonwealth. It's one thing to talk about expanding healthcare. I've done it. Expanded Medicaid for 400,000 Virginians. It's one thing to talk about raising teacher pay. I've done it with a 5% teacher pay raise in the House. It's one thing to talk about crim reform. I've done it as Chief Deputy Whip. It's one thing to talk about bringing diverse voices to the table. I've done it and will do it again as your next Lieutenant Governor. But there's so much work to be done. I want to be the last person in the room with the governor, whoever he or she may be. I want to make sure that every Virginian has a seat at the table and not on the menu. We need to rebuild our local economy stronger, expand access to healthcare, invest in our infrastructure like broadband, bridging the digital divide. We need to support our school systems from pre-K to post-secondary and give our students and teachers the tools they need to succeed. And we need to reform our criminal justice system to be a more equitable Commonwealth. It shouldn't be called crim reform. It should be called our justice system. We must unite Virginians to make real progress in people's lives. I believe I'm that person. So thank you again for coming, and I hope I earn your support as Lieutenant Governor.
Mr. Perryman.
Thank you. And thank you all for sticking with us this evening. It's been an interesting one where we got to discuss progressive values, Henry Howell, you name it, we covered it during this debate. But I really want to stress what we've been through in the last year. This marks 1 year since this COVID crisis began. We've seen so many people lose their jobs. We've seen so many people die, over 500,000 Americans dead from the COVID crisis. And we must keep that in mind when we talk about this election. This is not a promotion for me. This is not, frankly, and I'm sure many of my colleagues would agree with this, this isn't fun to campaign all the time. It's a lot of hard work, but we're doing it for the people who are being impacted, whether it be the economic crisis or the climate crisis or the COVID response. We're doing it for the impacted communities. And as someone who was a leader in an organization that helped impact the communities, this is why I'm running. I'm running to level the playing field. We saw what the blueprint is to win in the South, and that was done in Georgia. And it was done by Black organizers on the ground. As someone who's organized in my community, I'm ready to organize at the statewide level to get us to a more equitable Virginia. The baseline and the basics of my campaign is all about equity, the economic recovery, the environment, and uplifting and empowering people. This is what we can do with this election. It's more than 2021. We're building our progressive bench and values for years to come. And so I'm looking forward to doing that with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Perryman. Thank you all for joining us tonight. We have one more Virginia People's Debate on March the 16th at 7 p.m. You can register for the Zoom at virginiapeoplesdebates.org, and those debates will also stream live on Facebook and YouTube. And of course, be sure to vote on June the 8th. Have a great night, everyone. Thank you so much to all of the candidates, and stay safe.
Thank you.